Well, hello, happy new year. Welcome to the wonderful year that is 2021. Martin, how are you enjoying lockdown 3.0?
Well, it's almost as good as lockdown 1.
It's not though,
Slightly better than lockdown 2.
it's
Uh,
colder.
it's proper lockdown stuff. I don't like these sort of half and half sort of lockdowns. If you're doing a lockdown, you've got to be locked down, I reckon. Stuck in your
I,
home.
I see. That's really interesting. Is that a philosophy you extend to other areas in your life, Martin?
Well, it's no half measures. No
I've
half
heard
measures.
that about you. I've heard that about you. I've heard it phrased as a complaint though.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's like if you go out for a drink, you've got to have a drink, haven't you? If you go out to eat, you've got to eat. Everything you've got to do
No
to
half points. Is that what you're saying?
exactly live life to the full. So
Right. Okay.
lockdown has got to be done to the full. I never go out.
So, are you a happy mask wearer? Are you anti-masker?
I go for the full mask. You
Yeah,
know, the,
burqa.
yeah, well, no, even more than that, like a Shrek, or something
Brilliant.
like that.
Okay, wonderful. Like a
Yeah.
sort of a plasticized sort of replica of a cartoon character.
That sort of thing. I think it has to be done. Yeah.
And Shrek would be your choice. First choice.
Well, you see,
I think maybe Scooby Doo would be a good one.
Scooby Doo would be a good one. Yes, I haven't got a Scooby Doo. To be truthful, I haven't got a Shrek either. But
Okay. One of my daughters has been had a little production line over Christmas making masks, and I've got a lovely collection now of handmade masks, which I sometimes wear in the house.
are you selling them? Did you say?
No,
Well,
no,
You could. You could.
well, I couldn't because I think she would be upset with me if I sold the masks that she'd made for me.
Well, obviously, I was thinking of her as a business partner rather than you stealing them and then selling them on the streets.
No, you don't know me very well, do you?
An online business venture I was thinking of. That's kind of where I was going.
Well, we're all about online business ventures, and schools are all about online and remote learning at the moment, aren't they?
They are indeed. I love your segue.
I was,
Slightly
it was,
tortured.
I was getting on a bit, and I thought we needed to say something a bit less crap, and you weren't budging.
Yeah, yeah. So online learning. It's quite an interesting one, isn't it? There's an interview coming up with Bennie Kara later, and we talked about online learning and the best perhaps ways that she's found that schools are doing it in her experience. She works in an all through school from the ages of 3 to 18. So I can't imagine 3-year-olds online learning so well.
No, it's not. It doesn't sound like an easy win. I think Doug Lemov's book, Teaching in the Online Classroom, has been selling like hotcakes, doing very brisk trade. And I started a new job in January, working for an academy trust. And a lot of the conversations that I've been having with teachers have been about how they might want to go about tinkering with and maybe reflecting on improving some of their online teaching. There's a big pressure from people outside of education that lessons should be live. That seems to be some people's opinion of the gold standard. But I think the reality is that there are all sorts of potentially problems with live lessons, and that maybe really good practice is a mix of blended between live and pre-recorded.
Yeah, and not having to look at the screen all day long
Wow.
is quite useful. I do think the liveness of something and the following of a timetable from this angle as a parent, should we say,
Mm.
is quite helpful though.
Yeah,
Um,
I think it's potential. I mean, I think the one of the issues with pre-recorded lessons is they can feel a bit disconnected, and I think if they're tied to events in the real world and things that students have been doing, work they've been doing, then I think they can work quite well. So, for instance, were a teacher to record a lesson, giving feedback to their students on work that they've done previously, that might be very successful potentially.
yeah, and use and like you say, mix and match, mix around a bit. But also the other thing with liveness is having some contact with the child. and being able to perhaps gauge how they're doing, perhaps a bit of a two-way conversation going on. I think that's
Absolutely.
quite important.
It is very important, and I think what's one approach which has worked well for a number of teachers is to use pre-recorded material and then have live interaction via chat functions, so that children can ask questions about pre-recorded material and the teacher can address them. Which, you know, I don't know whether all our viewers realise, but we're doing a live lesson right now, aren't we?
This is live.
This
Yes,
is real.
we are here, and it's very wearing. I mean, it is. I'm not saying this is very wearing. I mean, live lessons are very wearing.
I can't tell you.
It's more tiring than perhaps just an ordinary week at school, because you don't get those breaks to be able to sort of
There's that
to other fellow workers at the chalk face and things.
And I think people experience the fact that it's an awful lot of planning required to think through potential problems in advance rather than deal with them on the fly. And I think that's been difficult for teachers.
And there's a certain teacher at Eton found out as well that parents can see your lessons.
Yeah, I'm not sure that he's a typical case. What's the latest? I remember we were chatting about Knowlesy before Christmas. What's happened to him? Has he?
No, he hasn't got his job back, as far as I'm aware. So,
no. Has he not been killed or anything like that?
No.
No. Good.
And on that note, that's rather macabre little interval there. Again, an interesting segue. What about the exams?
Wow, good Lord. When old Boris Johnson introduced or announced that we would be locking down and snuck in the fact that exams were cancelled, I think, it would be interesting. Certainly from a certain section of the education community, there was a bit of a groan, particularly because there was absolutely no clarification. So exams cancelled, and there would be something else happening, but nobody had any idea what that would be. And since then, we've had a few leaks. The Times has suggested various ideas. Gavin Williamson, earlier in the week, let slip that his preference was that exams were going to be replaced with, drum roll, exams.
It's such an obvious idea. Apparently, I heard that there was a bit of panic in the streets of Westminster, shall we say, which is almost a Smiths song. But that perhaps Boris panicked and said, "Let's slip something," and then everyone's got to follow through. And
the words Boris and follow through heard together can quite an image, don't they?
So exams, as we have been discussing for some time, if you go back to series 1, have a look at our collection of what to do with exams. England, of course, I think Northern Ireland, perhaps, but certainly Wales and Scotland certainly sort of cancelled exams early and decided what they were going to do. And England sort of carried on with the idea that it would do exams. And then, of course, at the final minute, they decided against it. But you would have thought they would have something in place, a plan B.
Absolutely extraordinary, Martin. That the idea that, I mean, I think it was laudable, perhaps, that they decided that they would want to continue with exams were it possible to do so, but not to have planned what they would do instead, and to announce that they would be cancelling them, and then to go, well, we haven't got anything to do, anything else. There you go. We'll contact the fellas at Ofqual and see if they've got any ideas. Absolutely extraordinary.
And then Ofqual have sort of not quite prepared either, and but they're going to consult with teachers, which always means whatever goes wrong, well, that's what they wanted.
Yeah. Are they going to consult with teachers? Well, there's various reference groups that are sort of already up and running. The DfE has various reference groups, and probably they're the people who will be consulted with, rather than it actually being anything meaningful. But we've left it. It's too little, too late, isn't it? I mean, it is just January, and we are talking about grades that need to be out into the world at some point in late August. But it's not trivial, the fact that we want to avoid what happened last year. Gavin Williamson's made it clear, if he's capable of clarity in any sense at all, he's made it clear that he's not in favour of algorithms. They didn't land well last year. But I think that whatever we go for, whatever shape it ends up taking, maybe the most important thing is that there's a very long lag between grades arriving in schools and them having to be divulged to students. I think schools need a great deal of time to challenge and to query and to make sure that children are getting the fairest possible deal.
Well, is it? I haven't got the exact quote here, but I think the head of Ofqual actually said they wouldn't be as fair as they would be if they were exams. I mean, they're already putting in place a system that won't be so fair, which makes you wonder, should they actually use the same grading scale, like 1 to 9? How about?
No, I think that's a reasonable discussion, and I've seen some interesting ideas around that you could. What are we using the exams for? What are the grades for? One of mainly they're a signal to potential employers and to universities and to A-level providers, further education providers, about students' capability of onward study. And so maybe you could have a system which simply reported something like capable of studying this subject further, a reasonable pass, or not capable of, whatever. We could do something like that. But I think that the students who, up until Boris's announcement, were working and had been preparing for exam grades, telling them that they're not going to get those at such short notice feels a little bit difficult. And of course, whatever mechanism we come up with for determining what those grades will be won't have parity with grades from other years where exams have been used. They won't have been arrived at in the same way. And I think for years to come, the COVID years, if you were certificated in 2020 or 2021, people will know that was that what's on paper possibly doesn't reflect students' true ability, whatever that means, and a little bit of leeway will have to be given. But I don't know, my instinct is replacing grades with some other kind of grade is probably not that useful. What do you think, Martin?
Well, this precision, isn't it? So if you get a 9 or an 8 or a 7, for example, is it going to be that precise, the differences, the fine grading between those three? I doubt it. And certainly not in a way that you could then complain or as a teacher say, well, they should have got an 8, but they got a 7. I mean, it's so difficult to judge it at that fine a grain. So I think there perhaps should be some sort of wider criteria. I mean, in the arts, in art exams beyond GCSE, they tend to use things like pass, merit, and distinction. I think that's a good way forward when things are more subjective. In other words, people are in a sort of broader range of possible grades that you could say, well, they're definitely not there. They're definitely not there. So they're probably there, rather than they're definitely there. You see what I mean?
I do. So do you think that's a change we should make for this year?
I don't know. I mean, perhaps in some subjects such as the maths of this world, the sciences of this world, there are ways of doing it more precisely, but perhaps in more of the art subjects, perhaps there isn't. I mean, they are talking about replacing exams with exams, aren't they?
And so, yes, I think the phrase that's kicking around is mini exams. And we happen to have a sneak preview of what these mini exams will look like. We've got a little graphic there to show. There we are, very, very small exams that fit in the palm of the hand. So that's what our students can look forward to this year.
You could call it borrowers GCSEs or something.
Yeah, we could call them that, and that would be a nice literary reference for those that were in the nude. Yes. But no, so there's some kind of vague idea that the exam boards will provide some kind of assessment. Maybe that will look like old style controlled assessments. Maybe it will be a little bit more like exams, but much shorter. Who knows? And that that teachers will be responsible for marking these internally. And according to Gavin Williamson, training on standardization will be forthcoming.
And of course, these are teachers who we're already discussing have been exhausted through the preparation and delivery of online lessons.
Suck dry.
And then to expect them to have extra training. And then perhaps when's this marking to be done? Is it to be done over holiday periods or at weekends? I mean, is it outside of contract? Are they going to pay?
They won't pay. They won't pay. Of course, they won't pay. And for those that remember the horror that was controlled assessment, it was basically it's the worst of all worlds, where teachers basically had to do all of this themselves, and nobody received any payment for it beyond their regularly contracted payment, and we had very unreliable, invalid results as a consequence. And that's what the government are proposing. It would appear, certainly according to the Sunday Times, that we will be in for.
And of course, is this going to be done at school? I mean,
it will be done at school. The idea that it could be done remotely is extraordinary. I know I've heard that over the last few weeks, some schools have gone ahead with mock examinations done remotely, which I have to say feels like tacit encouragement of cheating.
Well, you see, this is where fairness comes in, because the same thing with controlled assessments that were done at, over a period of time. So there was redrafting of essays and all that. The reason assessments came in was to stop people cheating. But then at the same time, the idea was, of course, that teachers were judged to some extent on the quality of the grades that their class got. So then there was another level of should we say, inducement to perhaps slightly help a child more than perhaps was unnecessary. That was necessary. I'm trying to use the English language there.
I think many teachers will have experienced pressure to manipulate results in all sorts of ways. And I think what's potentially likely to happen with these mini exams, whatever they turn out to be, is that I think cynically, most of us will believe that someone somewhere won't be playing by the rules. And if someone somewhere isn't playing by the rules, then our students will be disadvantaged if we follow the rules.
So therefore,
let's get in early and game them as far as is possible. And it's very, very difficult, because these, I suppose so maybe one potential saving grace is that this year, because of all of this nonsense, the results are not going to be as high stakes for schools, but there's still going to be high stakes for students, and there's going to be pressure on teachers to get the very, very best outcomes for their students, and particularly in fee-paying schools, parents will be expecting. They've paid for the grades that their students are going to be getting, and it's going to be very, very difficult to be forthright and honest in this environment, I think.
Well, they said it'd be moderated, and of course, then there's not moderated by the algorithm, but moderated by human beings. So then there'll be
how's that going to
collecting evidence from schools and putting it all together, and who's doing that, and are they doing it for every subject? And I'll be interested to see how they moderate live drama exams. That'll be quite interesting. Perhaps they'll do it by video, which is a dreadful way of doing it.
To use a technical term, I think that most people would describe this as a dog's breakfast.
Yeah, and it's a U-turn by the government, but not the only one, of course, that they've made this week.
Have the government ever made a U-turn before, Martin?
Well, just looking at Marcus Rashford's campaigns about free school meals, every 2 2 minutes or so, it seems the government changes its mind. Every time we come up to a holiday, they say, we're not going to give you free school meals during the holiday. And then a couple of days into the holiday, if not before, yes, we will give you free school meals during the holiday. It's an extraordinary place to get themselves into.
It's an absolute masterclass in how not to do politics.
It seems to be, which makes you, of course, very suspicious. They surely can't be this bad and never listening and never learning
Really,
the lesson of last week.
I've seen a couple of conspiracy theories that maybe the apparent ineptitude of the government is to conceal some other deeper, darker secret.
Well,
The idea
it might be
the idea that this
behind us the
particular
pandemic,
government is
perhaps.
capable of instigating a conspiracy, I think, is requires a willing suspension of disbelief. But maybe they are that clever, Martin, and we're all being duped.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it. I mean, the idea is this has got to be a policy for the future about what to do about people on free school meals, the precariat, I mean, people who are poor, who find it difficult to afford food, especially in a crisis, in a huge crisis, no matter what it might be. But should schools be providing this, or councils, or central government, and how should it be done? These can't just be last minute decisions, and those the pictures.
And people have been campaigning for years and years to have meals provided to children during school holidays. And so the fact, arguably, the fact that this has had so much attention recently, that someone as prominent as Marcus Rashford has got involved and is adding his considerable weight to the public debate, is moving something forward. That out of this pandemic, something good may come eventually. That we will commit as a country to providing basic sustenance to families on the edge during school holidays.
It also plays to a narrative, of course, about the Tories. I mean, I remember having my milk snatched by Margaret Thatcher.
I remember Maggie Thatcher, the milk snatcher.
That's it. 1970s. There I was in my primary school drinking milk, and I loved it. I actually loved those little.
I remember the straw in the tiny bottle. Yeah.
And when the birds got there as well. Anyway,
I don't remember that.
Happy days. But she ruined my childhood.
She literally took it out of your hand, didn't she, Martin?
She personally grabbed it out of my hand. But that whole narrative, of course, not looking after the poor, not caring about kids' sustenance. It's quite a narrative for the Tories to find themselves again and again and again tripping over it. I mean, in government terms, they pay more to Didau Harding than they do to provide school meals. I don't know if that's true, by the way. That could be fake news, but
let's act as if it's true.
Yeah, that's much easier. Yeah.
It confirms all our biases, doesn't it, Martin?
That's the thing. And the other turnaround this week has been on tests, but not exams. Tests, but on the idea of testing. COVID testing in schools, and
couldn't make it up.
You could. Well, it might not be a
Could you make it up?
180-degree turn or a 360-degree turn of whatever, back to where they started. But the problem is the tests have been sort of kiboshed by I've forgotten who they're called. Who was it?
It's the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, the MHRA.
Thank you.
Apparently, they told
me I forgot
earlier. Yeah, I know. I can see. Easily done, Martin. Easily done. I'm reading from an article in front of me on my screen. I'm not that clever. But earlier in the week, they made it clear that they had not authorised the daily use of 30-minute tests due to concerns that they give false reassurance.
Yeah, and there was an interesting program, I think it was on Radio 4. It was the Today program from one of the people who represent the manufacturers of the test, who said that in order for it to work, I mean, you need to use it a lot. And he said, really, in a school, every child should be tested every day. And that will pick up a lot of kids. Well, yes, it would. And then he sort of said, but, for expediency's sake, once 3 times a week, he said. 3 times a week would be the sort of minimum number of tests per child per week in order to make sure the test had a certain efficacy. Now, that makes it extraordinarily difficult for a lot of schools to actually put it into action anyway.
And it looks like that were that to happen, we still have quite a lot of false negatives with children in school spreading the virus.
Yeah, and there's a lot of controversy about this, about whether if you're either well, I've got again. I'm losing my use of the English language. If you're pre got it, what's it called?
No idea. You're on your own on this one, Martin. Can't help you out on that.
If you're asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic, that's it. And perhaps you don't sort of spread it as much as others. But then there are other people say that, well, 30% of people are asymptomatic and are spreaders. So it's difficult to know. And there's different ages, and it affects how symptomatic you are at different ages and all that. But this is why they were saying about the 3 times a week, to pick up more people. It's going to pick up more people there, and it's better to pick up some than none, which is the other way of doing it. So will they be back to school this term? Perhaps not. Perhaps next term.
Well, it depends what you mean by this term. I think the big question is, will they be back? Will most children, the majority of children, be back in school before Easter? And there are various people working in schools who are pretty cross about the idea, or the media using the phrase "schools are closed," because they're very, very keen for everyone to know that schools are not closed. They're open for vulnerable children and key workers children. And in some schools, that means there's an awful lot of children in school who need to be catered for, whilst at the same time teachers are engaged in remote teaching. But the big question, yes, will schools reopen to the majority of students before Easter? And I think at the moment it's anyone's guess, isn't it? It doesn't look likely right now.
It doesn't, does it? But speaking personally, the sooner they open, I think, the better for the long term.
I think you're absolutely right.
Of our children, and emotional health as well as academic health, if you like.
What do you think about this? What is it? This Brazilian strain that's doing the rounds?
Well, they said better not to name them by country, didn't they?
Right. Because, sorry, Brazilians.
We have the British strain, the English strain, the Kent strain, if you want to sort of, or the Spanish strain, if you want to.
Correctly.
Hey,
did you pronounce that correctly?
You're treading a fine line there. Look, before we get into the sort of murk of David's mind, I think we ought to perhaps talk to somebody who's been at the front line this year. Bennie Kara, who's
one of my favourite teachers, Bennie Kara. Yeah, you spoke to her earlier this week, didn't you?
I spoke to her earlier this week, and we spoke about COVID and teaching in the times of COVID, and then we started to talk about curriculum, decolonisation, decentering, various issues around there. The whole interview is fascinating. It'll be out during the week, but we're going to give you a flavour of it now.
Yeah, let's go. Roll VT.
Right. Her book, Diversity, I think it's... Tell me about it. What's it called, Bennie?
It's called A Little Guide for Teachers, Diversity in Schools. It's quite a mouthful for a tiny book.
And it is a tiny book, you tell me.
It is. It's a tiny book. I can hold it up, actually. Yeah, it's like, I think it's not much bigger than my face. So yeah, it's only 104 pages long. It can be read in one sitting, and that's what it's designed for. Busy teachers dipping in and out of something.
And dipping in and out is useful to have on the shelf because you can keep going back to it. In other words, it's not just a one-off read.
No, definitely not. And because it's split into quite distinct sections, it allows you to kind of move. You don't have to have read the beginning to have read the end to read the end. It's very much kind of standalone parts of a book. And there's been lots of positive feedback about the fact that it's quite practical. the whole intent behind it was, I'm a working teacher. I want practical ideas that I can apply tomorrow. And the fact that people have said, look, I've read your book and this is what I'm going to do in my classroom with my students immediately. I think that's the purpose of it. So that feels quite good.
And you're a working teacher in these COVID times, which must be, well, strenuous to say the least. You're deputy head teaching and learning at a school in Derby, and you're also in charge of curriculum. Tell me, how's it been? Are you mainly online, or do you go into school, or what?
So I am going into school. Our teaching is very much a mixed model. We've a population around us that has very limited access to resources. So we've had to really bespoke an approach to the children in front of us, and our teachers have been fabulous at trying to get paper packs ready, which we're delivering. We've got drop-off points in the community and pick-up points in the community, and my colleagues have been visiting students and making sure they've got laptops. So it is strenuous, but in some ways the team has been absolutely fantastic to make sure our kids can get something of the provision that some of their peers might be getting across the country.
Do you find that online teaching is wearing? A lot of teachers are saying it's makes them more tired being actually online teaching in schools, and that's saying something, because the teaching in schools is quite tiring in itself.
It is. I think, from speaking to the teams at school, it's a different kind of tired. People have said, look, actually my eyes hurt, I've got a headache. And it is quite exhausting, that kind of intensity of looking at the screen and managing those silences. And, we haven't been doing loads of live lessons because of the lack of access for our students, and we're starting to roll that out. But, where they have trialed the live lessons, people have said, God, that was actually really tiring. So how some teachers are doing 5 live lessons a day, I just, it's incredible. But that's a testament to the profession. I think people are incredibly adaptable, and they will do anything for the students.
And the other thing, of course, is the poor student who's sat there staring at the screen all day without a break, trying to concentrate and focus. It's probably more difficult for them as well, I would have thought.
Certainly, our teachers, my colleagues who've got children say, this isn't a sustainable model because they're sat in front of a screen all day, and that's not healthy for our children. They need a break, and they've really appreciated where lessons have been sort of 20 minutes of pre-recorded material with some activities and plenty of breaks during the day. But at the moment, you can't criticize any system because we're all doing what we can, and it's trial and error until a vaccination, I imagine. So that's the thing. And, I'm never going to sit here and criticize it because people do what they can with what they have. But yeah, I wouldn't want any child of mine to be sat in front of a screen that long.
And concentrating and focusing on live lessons all the time. It's getting that balance right. I mean, from my own experience as a parent, certainly having a mixed economy. It's good to have the teachers dropping in to keep you on your toes, keep things going, to keep that contact with the kid going as well. And you can obviously see how they are, and those sort of, looking after their welfare and as well as part of it. But if every lesson was completely live all the time, all day long, I think that becomes a problem as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the practicalities of it are also something to consider. So if you've got 3 children and they're all doing live lessons, that you need 3 devices to make that happen, to have that parity of access. And you need the bandwidth, and you need the space in a room, in a house, and not all of our children have that. So that mixed economy, you're right, is absolutely vital. You've got a real need to kind of chunk it down and to timetable it appropriately for the children.
Yeah. And try and keep contact with the parents as well, if anything's concerning, perhaps, because it's easier for a child to say they've done the work. But if you haven't got the direct contact with the school saying, well, actually, it's not being done, or there is an issue here with the quality of it. I mean, not surprisingly. Or do we just hope for the best, and then when they come back, we then try and do catch up, or whatever a way of expressing it might be?
Well, certainly my approach has been, we've been doing a lot of quality assurance of what's been going out to the students, either via online platforms or in the paper packs. And for us, it's closing the loop. So yes, you're setting the work, but is there enough dialogue about kind of submitting and then feedback? Because that's what children will miss. They'll miss their teacher's input. And then you kind of really distinguishing between work that is aligned to your sequences of work, aligned to your schemes of work, and not just sort of extended cover work. And that's something that we've been really conscious of, to try and stick to the curriculum as far as possible, so that when we do get them back, that there is some chance, there's a chance in hell that they can get back on track quicker than if you sort of bundled things together without thought.
What's the age group you teach there?
So we're an all through school, so 3 to 18, but I'm based at the secondary and I'm a secondary specialist. However, I have learned a lot about primary in the last couple of years, and it's fascinating, and actually seeing the resilience of the children from a very young age all the way up to our sixth formers. That's been incredible. Our primary kids, I always say they bounce. They are incredibly adapted to whatever's going on around them. And the primary has been a really pleasant environment for them, for those who are actually in school.
Now, if you teach that hugely wide age gap, I mean, 3 to 18, extraordinary, really, isn't it? And seeing them go through from childhood to adulthood, hugely, I should think, quite an extraordinary experience. Could you tell me one thing? Exams are screwed up. We know that. And this year they're screwed up. But what I'm interested in is next year's exams. How's that going to go? Do you think there's going to be issues there, or do you think everything can go back to normal?
I think normal is a word that I have trouble with anyway. The knock-on effects of what's happening now, that ripple effect is going to cross years. And, we're talking about year 11, and actually it's not just about year 11, it's about our year 10s and our year 9s as well. And we've got such a lot of work to do around how to ensure that children are back on track to be able to do exams in some way, shape or form. Exams are a leveler. I don't think they're perfect, but I certainly think that they are important to eradicate kind of biases in our system. So yes, I want the exams to be back. I think the current situation where we've got a consultation coming, and it's all up in the air. That uncertainty is really unsettling for students who are being told on one hand that they might be cancelled, they might be on. And so it becomes very difficult to stay motivated under those circumstances.
Yeah, I'm really interested in what you said there about, because this is one of the issues people have with teacher assessment. And that is the unconscious, or conscious even sometimes, bias of a teacher towards a pupil. And can they examine fairly? Now, of course they will want to.
Yeah.
Can they?
I think it's a really tough one. I believe in the integrity of our teachers. I believe in the integrity of the profession. And, we all go in knowing that when we assess our students, that there are all sorts of factors that might influence that particular grade, and no one goes in with the intention of giving one child a better grade than another. But it's very hard. You have your favorites, you have the ones that you know what they meant, so you give them the mark. It's very hard to take your relationship out of giving a mark to a child. And I think that, with the exams, some of that is taken away. I still think there are, biases within the exam system. Some of the papers themselves are very specific in terms of cultural experiences. And it's not necessarily just about culture either. When you think about the class difference and the experiences of different socioeconomic backgrounds, and whether an exam paper can fully reflect the experiences of a working class child compared to a child from a wealthy background, actually there's inherent flaws in an exam system. So we're never going to get to perfect. And in this climate, I think for me the most important thing is clarity from our glorious leaders about what is happening, why it's happening, and how we're going to make it fair, as opposed to leaked memos and speculation.
I thought for a minute there you were saying glorious leaders without any irony, but I think I detect there might have been slight amount of irony there. This of course brings us into your themes of your book about diversity. I'm just taking some notes here earlier. In classroom, curriculum and school. I'm talking about class in classroom as well, of course, there, but also race, also gender. You tell me, what's diversity to you?
To me, it's about the protected characteristics. And I think, the risk with some of the recent narratives around equality and diversity is that we narrow diversity down to just being about race and culture and religion. And actually, for me and for our students are a multitude of characteristics. Some of them have intersectional identities. So they may have a disability and be Asian. They may be a transgender child and have be a person of color, and so there's all sorts of these overlaps. And when you think about diversity, it's really about creating a sense of equity and understanding that there are different starting points for different people. And as teachers, actually, we are naturally aligned to that process. When we think about our classroom spaces, we'll say, well, that child came in on a standardized score of 90, therefore, we want them to make this amount of progress, and we're going to be ambitious about it, and we're going to put the steps in place to be able to support them. And diversity in schools is very similar to that. It's just an extension of what we do with progress and attainment, where we've got a child who struggles accessing because of a multitude of reasons, an equitable process for them, teachers knowing the kind of things they need to do to be able to support a child. That's what I feel like diversity really means. And I don't think we can overcomplicate it either.
Okay, I mean, is that a sort of way? I don't know quite how to phrase it. I think personalized would be the nearest word I could think of, but it's personalized rather than to the individual, but to where they are in the intersection, perhaps. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, there's no, I don't think there's a kind of template that you can use. I think there are things that you can do to mitigate for those intersections and for the barriers that come about because of some of those protected characteristics. You mitigate for disability. You can't solve that problem, but you put in steps to try and alleviate any lack of access that child might have. So yeah, absolutely. When we look at creating a school that is diverse, inclusive, equitable, it's recognizing that actually one size fits all for all of the students doesn't always work, and that we might actually be exacerbating gaps in attainment and progress, gaps in our society on a broader scale by erasing some of the personalized needs that these students have.
That was a very interesting interview, Martin.
Yeah, and there's a lot more to it. We talk about her book, Diversity, but like I say, it then moves on to perhaps what we mean by decolonization or decentering, right, and what these terms might mean in terms of curriculum and curriculum content in particular. So it's a fascinating interview, and it's part of a wide range of interviews we've got on this subject already from series 1, which if you're new to this channel, please do subscribe to and have a look around at our back catalogue if you like, and also listen to more, because this is an ongoing conversation about what should be in the curriculum and why, and it's highly controversial, highly political, but I must say I found talking to Bennie really eye-opening in some senses of the word, but also that she was able to talk widely about this topic, and in such a way that made me think, right, let's put this to you. What about this? And she fielded all these different questions and all these points that perhaps come from other parts of the argument, if you like, and from that we've had from people before, whether it be Jules Dilby and Phil Beadle on one side, or people like Calvin Robinson and Catherine Singh on the other side. So all part of the conversation.
So do you think you changed your mind at all, Martin?
I find this whole conversation fascinating, because I mean I'm a student of culture, a student of cultural studies, no less. So these are arguments that I've been imbued with for a very long time, and find fascinating. And always, I think content of the curriculum is something that is very difficult to discern, especially in the arts and the humanities. It's easier perhaps in the sciences and mathematics, and but in the arts, it's a very difficult one to answer what should be in there and why. And I'm completely open to listening to arguments about it, because it's the discussion I think is probably more important than what the answers are.
I think you're right. I think the difficulty is part of the tradition. The fact that the arts is so much more than the academic discipline. The fact that we all, or most of us, feel some kind of vested interest in the arts, and so we want to discuss about, you know, what's good, what's highbrow, what's important. The fact that we disagree about these things is actually part of the process. It's an important inherent quality of what it is to discuss English or history of art or drama or any of these subjects. Do you think?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because in the sciences, to some extent, you tend, now I'm on dodgy ground here, but you tend to teach the latest science,
Yeah,
the up-to-date stuff, but
yeah,
rather than the history of science, so to speak. Whereas in the arts, you can just teach the stuff that's out today, but you wouldn't understand the context of it and what it's fighting against, what it's moving against. Now, I might be completely ignorant on what I've just said about the sciences. Of course, Newtonian gravity. There are things that add certain amount to it, but in the arts, you throw things away and say this is bad, this is good, you know, and all that is part of the discussion. You want people to develop their own opinions about things.
Absolutely. And it's and of course in mathematics they're still pretty keen on Pythagoras. I understand he's been around a while.
He has indeed, but I think it's less about him as a person and his art than the actual solidity of what he came up with.
So that's an important and interesting point in and of itself, isn't it? That the art created, the works that we study. Do we study the works, or do we study the creators of the works?
And the relation between the two is quite fascinating. It's to go back to Marcus Rashford is something he tweeted this week about books, about the importance of books. It was a quote by James Baldwin, and the quote was slightly bastardized, and I think I found it on the internet, and I think it's been bastardized on the internet. What James Baldwin was talking about was reading not books, but specifically, amongst others, Dostoevsky and Dickens, and, you know, sort of pointing out that their works were perhaps pointing towards universal values and all that. So, you know, we do link the art to the artist quite a lot. And is Dostoevsky and Dickens, are they better writers than others?
Well, do you know, the interesting intersection there is Baldwin. The fact that Baldwin would make that claim about Dostoevsky and Dickens is the bit that I find really, really interesting.
Yeah, and it's worth digging up the original quote. It comes from, I think it was from Life magazine in 1963. It's in my timeline on Twitter, if anyone really
well, it's a whole, the fact that Tolstoy was so interested in Dickens, he was really obsessed with Dickens as a writer. And I don't know much about the connection between Dostoevsky and Dickens, but the fact that there might be one, and certainly one in as much as Baldwin's made one, is a great thing to think about. That you know, is how much is Baldwin part of that conversation? And I would say very much. You know, I think I would definitely, if I was forced at gunpoint to put a a top 10 together, Giovanni's room would be up there. It would be struggling to, it would be certainly making a big noise about getting into the top 10. And so this is one of the really interesting points about the whole idea of diversity, that how much is the conversation about diversity, how much of that is about the diversity of outward appearance, and how much of it is about the diversity of thought?
Well, we discuss that, and we do discuss that actual question about diversity of thought within there, because of course people on the libertarian right, perhaps we can call them, very much into diversity of thought and the importance of that. And just because you have, the other thing is, why is it English literature and not literature of the world? I mean, like we study drama, we don't necessarily study English drama. We study science, we don't necessarily study English science. But why English literature?
Trouble, wouldn't we? English.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating conversation. I'm really interested that you picked up the Russians there, because I'm going to bring in a quote now to move on. But
yes.
I think we've got
put it up without further ado. This is a tweet that Martin put onto Twitter, which is the place you put tweets, in case you didn't know, he invited responses to this question. What do we think of this description of education? So here is a description of education: the dissemination of knowledge, abilities, skills, values, experience, and competencies for the purpose of intellectual, moral, creative, physical, and professional development. And so, Martin, tell us, why did you tweet that tweet?
Well, the reason I put it up there was because there was a bit of discussion during the week that I saw about people objecting to the Ofsted criteria, which is a sort of similar sort of statement, though shall we say more succinct, and it tends to be about memory and and be able to recall things and various things like that. Actually, we could have put that up as well as but this one was sort of a bit more flowery, a bit more inclusive of other things, shall we say.
It was interesting, I thought, Martin, to look at your is timeline the correct word? But there were people, the word that people seem to take issue with was the word dissemination.
Yeah, and someone quite rightly pointed out, of course, this is a translation now, you see.
Right, and we've got another picture, because where this definition came from is really interesting. And tell us a bit about this, Martin.
Yeah, if you can read this on your phones, because I think most people watch this show, believe it or not, on their phones. And it says, Kremlin demands to vet what academics are teaching. So they need, of course, if you're going to vet people and to sort of check what they're doing and check the content of what they're doing, you've got to describe what they're doing in such a way as to sort of nail it down. So you need a definition of education. And of course, I think to some extent, if a lecturer is delivering, is disseminating, is doing the teaching, that becomes very much part of what you need to define. Does a teacher disseminate?
Well, I think perhaps if a teacher isn't disseminating, what are they doing?
Well, that's it. Are they sharing, or are they
in discussion?
Are they? Well, it's that dissemination. But you see, the crime, if they are doing something wrong, then it would be on their necks, should we say? And I use that word advisedly. That the Kremlin might be interested in. It's the teacher what done it, so to speak. A bit like the Eton teacher, for example. It's dissemination that caused the problem in that term as well. So it's the teacher's job to disseminate when it's sort of taken out of context and put into the context of, what did you say?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So it's not about whether or not they're disseminating, it's what they're disseminating.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter what the kid's learning by it either, probably. Or in this case,
well, I think it absolutely does matter what they're learning, according to the Kremlin.
Well, no, if you disseminate it, doesn't matter if they learn it or not. I'm sure they might deny it. I didn't learn it. I didn't learn it.
I remember visiting an independent school in China, and they had a reasonably light touch inspection. And the focus of the inspection of independent schools in China is the 3 T's: Tiananmen, Tibet, and Taiwan. And as long as there's absolutely no mention of the 3 T's in your curriculum, fine. If you do mention them, woe betide you.
That's interesting. When I was in Shanghai, I was in a hotel and severely jet lagged, and watching BBC World Service, and every now and then it would go completely blank as the censor got hold of it. So I think to a certain level, dissemination in China is quite sensitive. There was a lovely program on, I can't remember when, probably before you were born, David, on TV about North Korean education, and it was talking about, they brought in liberal arts school run by mainly Catholics from America, and these teachers were brought in to teach the children of the upper echelons of the party. And it was to open their minds to the world, and to not be the sort of brainwashing education that apparently some say happens elsewhere. It was to open their minds, to make them more creative and thinkers and critical thinkers and all that. But even there, every now and then, one of the teachers would get sent back to America because they'd said something slightly too much about critical thinking and creativity.
Even in North Korea.
Even in North Korea. This is before the Trump.
I find that difficult to believe, Martin, that even in North Korea, a teacher might get in trouble for teaching.
I know, quite extraordinary.
If you can't teach whatever you want to teach in North Korea, where can you teach?
Exactly. Yeah. No, but I mean, obviously in North Korea, in China, in Russia,
in Eton.
How much? It's a really interesting conversation. And again, if you go through our back catalogue, I think this Toby Young obviously talks about this. Claire Fox talks about this, again from certain angles, as does Calvin Robinson, talking about it from their perspective of being free speech warriors.
We kind of glossed over the fact that subscribers are going to get all sorts of access to our back catalogue. And not only that, but if you subscribe to the channel, you will also be notified when Bennie Kara's full interview is released during the week. So that's absolutely worth subscribing for. And also, if you subscribe every week, we do a book draw, don't we, Martin? And this week, we're going to give away a couple of copies of Bennie Kara's book, Diversity in Schools. And if you happen to be a subscriber, you're up with a chance of winning. So, Martin, I should tell everybody that Martin cuts up new subscribers each week and puts them into his hat. And if he draws your name, if you email us at hello@wastingyourtime.co.uk, we will send you a copy of Bennie Kara's book.
Here we
Martin,
go.
who's won?
So the first one I've drawn out of the hat is Arjan Marie.
Arjan Marie. Arjan Marie, email us at hello@wastingyourtime.co.uk, and you will be. You can receive, should you do that, a copy of Diversity in Schools. And who else has got it up for a copy?
And we have Sarah Shepherd. Sarah Shepherd.
Sarah Shepherd, same deal. Email us and we will send you a copy of Bennie Kara's book. So that interview will be released during the week. Also during the week, the Times will tell us exactly what Gavin Williams is going to say the day and then the next day. That will happen too. You don't have to subscribe for that to be the case. That's the case whatever you do. Martin?
Yeah, if anyone wants to particularly thinks they'd like to be interviewed by us or have anything particular they'd like to say on this show, please get in touch as well via that email, and we'll come along and interview you. Come along.
We'll come along virtually and interview you. So that email was hello@wastingyourtime.co.uk, and I hope that you all have a socially distant weekend, and within those very strict parameters, experience joy and love and good things. And thank you for wasting time with us. See you next time.
You can cry and cry until your eyes are red. You can toss and tumble on a sleepless bed, but you're wasting your time trying to lose the blues. Lose the blues, lose the blues. You can walk the streets through the lonely night. You can tell yourself that everything's alright, but you